Hi, Denny here. The podcast episode you're about to listen to contains conversations about sexual assault and harassment that might be stressful to some listeners. If such topics might cause you distress, I recommend skipping this episode. In addition, there were some audio glitches during this recording, so I apologize for a few jittery moments in this episode. But it was still a great conversation I had with LauraK483 and BelleMist, so I hope you still enjoy this episode. Hi there, my name is Teni Brant, and welcome to Speak Dicely, the podcast where I get together with other tabletop enthusiasts and we speak dicely together. It isn't uncommon for people on the outside of tabletop role-playing communities to assume that games like Dungeons & Dragons are only played by men. This, however, is not true. Looking at D&D specifically, the publisher of the game Wizards of the Coast released some statistical info they collected from surveys in 2019. As of last year, they reported that of the estimated 40 million players in the D&D community, 39% are female identifying. That's more than 1/3 of the entire community. However, there is an unfortunate amount of gatekeeping that occurs, and the voices of women are important in standing against those who would seek to bar entry for others who just want to play the game. Joining me today to talk about women in tabletop role-playing are LauraK483 and BelleMist. Hey there, folks.
Hello.
Hey.
Hello.
How's it going?
Good.
Going good.
Yeah.
Other than I, of course, perfect timing through unfortunate eating incident and then my own medical issues. I managed to, my mouth is really sore today. It would take a long time to explain. But of course, the day before a podcast, I injure my mouth and make it hurt to talk. So it's gotten mostly better throughout the day. But if I ever like stumble over my words or seem a bit out of it, that might be why. Apologies ahead of time.
No worries. That's what editing is for.
Hey.
I know myself. I tend to stumble a lot over my own words and ums and such, so it's all good. Thank you both for joining me today on this podcast. As very clearly, I'm not going to be able to speak much to this topic, so I'm grateful to have you both here to be able to share your stories as women in the tabletop role-playing community.
It's our podcast now.
We've taken over.
Wow, that was quick. All right, well, I'll see you guys later.
Don't feel like afraid to contribute to the conversation, because part of the problem is so many people go, oh, well, I guess I'm just not going to help at all then. And then it's like they almost sabotage their own ability to advocate for other minorities or women and stuff because they're afraid of doing or saying the wrong thing. So don't feel like you need to sit back or censor yourself completely or anything. Feel free to jump in, do if you have anything that you think even contradicts what we're saying, because how people learn and how things change is through dialogue, right? So
of course, I don't mean in the sense that I can't contribute anything to this conversation, but more of the both of you are here today because I think your stories in this topic are going to be more important. But if I have something to say on it, I'll put it out there. I'm not, or at least my intent isn't malicious at all. And if I seem ignorant, I expect you both to correct me. But otherwise, tell us a bit about yourselves. What is it that you're passionate about?
Belle, you want to go first? Alphabetically, yeah. Make it easy. And if there's a question throughout the podcast today.
I'm a creative right to the very core of my being. I do loads of stuff to do with art. I'm a film student. I was a musician for a great deal of part of my life. So tabletop roleplay just kind of fell in there somehow, just kind of slipped through the cracks. I actually started when Dungeons started. That was my first campaign, and it was streamed live. It was...
You just jumped right in there.
Yeah. I kind of dived into a shark mouth, and...
Basically... I like to think we made it a bit easier. Well, most of it. Soko didn't, but the rest of us did.
Yeah. I never actually found it difficult. It's more thinking back. I feel like I should have been more nervous than I actually was.
Yeah, and then as for me, similar to Belle, I have been an artsy kid my whole life. When I was little, I was like, I want to be a famous actress. I never grew out of that. Went to theater school. I've played also a few musical instruments, mostly piano and violin. I transitioned from wanting to be on stage to being backstage due to a lot of a lot of factors, primarily though some physical limitations with my body that were making the onstage and really actually being in this tier of an actress you need to be to actually make it in the industry. So I transitioned to the backstage life so I could still be involved in theater and stuff. And now I feel like where D&D and tabletop RPGs came in, it's like getting to indulge the part of me that still was the little girl that wanted to be an actress and getting to step into other people's lives and experiences, even though they're characters you've made up yourself, and getting that kind of the theater kid in me that will never die is now satisfied through D&D basically. And I played in one long-term campaign before Dungeon Select, which is the campaign that Belle and I play in together that is live streamed. And that was my first ever campaign. It was a half homebrew, half like it used supplementary material from Wizards of the Coast and their worlds, but it wasn't one of their stories. Our DM made his own kind of story, but in a world with their characters. And some of it was great. One of the upsides, though, looking back, is that group was an anomaly in D&D because it was almost entirely women, but we had a male DM, one male party member, and then 4 female party members. And we told most people about our group, and they're like, "You have that many women in one group? Like, where did you find them all? Why did you collect all of them for one place?" Which obviously,
Gotta collect all of them.
yeah, gotta like Pokemon, gotta catch them all, right?
Yeah.
So, and then of course, I didn't realize how unique that was until I both played in other campaigns and then also just got into like consuming D&D media and content, from large scale things like Critical Role and stuff to smaller, like other small content creators, live streams, and playing one shots with friends for charity and stuff like that. So yeah, that's what got me into D&D and my kind of background with it.
Wow, that's it is very exciting to hear like that you had found a group that was primarily made of women, because also in my own experience, I hadn't played with many women in tabletop role-playing games, but I know they're out there, and I play with a lot of women playing the games I play in now. So I'm quite surprised that it has been less common in my history.
Part of, I think, us forming that group was all the women in that group were all like, we really want to play, but we can't find a group that will play with us, because they were either already full or they didn't want to take on, because all of us were new. Only one of the 4 women had played before. That poor Helen. She, of course, as the veteran of D&D who had played before, was the lawful good paladin with a bunch of noobs who were just murder hobos, who just did the dumbest things because we had no idea what was going on. We didn't understand our characters. We didn't know how to play the game. And she was just had to babysit so hard. And looking back now, I occasionally send her messages like, "Helen, just so you know, I appreciate how hard you tried to keep that train on the tracks during that whole campaign. It was a nightmare, but it was pretty funny."
And I think you kind of dipped into my next prompt there. Was have you known anyone who has ever felt unwelcome during your journey into tabletop role playing?
Oh yeah. I mean, my best friend, she's had her own issues with her campaign, just in terms of like not having her voice valued because she's a woman, essentially. She was assumed she didn't know anything, and she knows quite a lot, and that she'd never played before, and that it wasn't for her, and she managed to get into like a few campaigns but left because she just felt so uncomfortable.
And then I feel like what's kept like that group I spoke of, our first group, what kept a lot of those of us that were new to the game and we wanted to play for a long time and hadn't, like, gender aside, a lot of games in general, you come into a group and even look at like Among Us, for example, surge in popularity. Denny and I play Among Us together fairly frequently. If you are newer to the game or even on the more introverted or quieter side, regardless of your gender, it can be very hard to kind of assert yourself in there, to be involved. And you have all these people who are very skilled at the game, who know all the nooks and crannies, who know all the details, all the rules, who know where every vent goes, or who know what every saving throw does, and that on its own. So if you're already coming into it as a new player, as a woman, it's very easy to get talked over a lot, or the other players, half the time unintentionally, because they're just so excited in the moment and they've played, they know exactly what ability they'd use or what spell or how they'd react, and you don't. So you just kind of end up sitting back a lot because you don't have the space. Like, no one kind of waits to see if, like, do you have something you could do? And balancing that and giving new players a chance to come in is already hard, but then the added layer when you're female identifying new player, because even like there's lots of TikToks going around. It's like, tell me when you realize the bar for men was set really low, and most men are commonly going, when I had a woman thank me for not interrupting her once during the course of an entire date. We're just so used to getting talked over. Look at the vice presidential debate in the US and Kamala Harris having to go, I am speaking, and just cut him off. So combine and a lot of men don't even know. They're not intentionally doing it. They don't come in there with the intention to like gatekeep the women in their game, but they're just so used to being given the room to speak, and they just, without having to make the room for themselves to speak. So I think that's what makes it really hard. Unless you've already established, like you've played D&D, you're fighting the just systemic ingrained giving yourself room to be involved and speak, but then also just the general, it's hard for any new player, let alone being women, when you have people that have vast experience and know what they want to do and are just very immersed in the game in that moment.
Mm-hmm. You know, you bring up a lot of good points in that. It like standing up to the systemic establishments that have been so fed into for so long. Like if regardless of which community, like if you're an ally, make sure like if you see somebody trying to speak, if you are in a position of privilege, like step up and make those doors available. Just help out your fellow people.
That goes not just for women too, but like we had a player who's no longer a part of Dungeon Select, but in the beginning, they are a very, very introverted, very shy person and would frequently get talked over. And occasionally, like Belle or myself, we'd have to be like, hey guys, hold on. They wanted to say something. Like, was your character going to do something? And kind of like make that space for them. And I would frequently get messages afterward from that person being like, thank you so much for doing that, because I find it really hard to do that for myself. So, and again, that goes obviously like gender doesn't really matter there. It just happens more with your women. But that's, if you're like, well, how do I help? How do I avoid that from happening? That's how, because we all in the heat of the moment get excited and maybe interrupt someone or cut them off. But just when you can, just be on look at, you see someone kind of open their mouth, or you see them, you can tell they have something they want to do. It's on their face, but they're hesitating, being like, oh, did you want to say something? Did you have an idea? Like, and kind of just give them the space.
Mm-hmm. And this is a bit of an off tangent, but I was just watching the History of Swear Words, a series on Netflix, and I just watched the episode on the word bitch. And by the way, this podcast is cuss is fine.
Good.
And I just and I just thought it was so interesting, like how the context of the word can be hostile or can be positive, like depending on who's using it. For example, myself, if I was to direct it, it's like that is clearly a negative connotation and that's unacceptable. And I absolutely agree with that. But like for women saying it like to each other, depending on context, again, like there is a power in that.
Yeah, I call my friends bitches all the fucking time. I start conversations with just like, hey bitches, just all the time.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's kind of making sure, if you're an ally, like understanding what is acceptable and how you can help people who don't have quite that same privilege that you might have. And in my sense, that's coming from the side of being a man. Anyway, in your opinions, what does it mean to be a woman in the tabletop role-playing community?
A lot of the women like being identifying as a woman and being involved in the TTRPG scene, there's a lot of crossover with like online gaming, really just internet culture in general, because this isn't a D&D specific problem. It's like, even for example, the joke of like, a woman mentions, oh, like I'm a gamer. Oh yeah, what do you play? Do you play Stardew Valley? Do you play Animal Crossing? No, do you play a real game? Or the minute you say, oh, like I'm a Legend of Zelda fan, name the chronological order every Zelda game came out. And even outside of gaming, you say you're a Star Wars fan. They're like, name every planet in the Star Wars system. And you're like, oh my God.
You're just constantly having to validate your own interests and passions, and it's absolute insanity.
Or then if you like say, or like for one of the number one questions I got asked when getting into D&D was people going, oh, did your boyfriend get you into it? Do you want to play? And it's like this assumption that a male had to bring you in or that you were interested. Mm-hmm. And while there's significant crossover with just internet culture in general, where it comes into play in D&D specifically, and why I think it's more embedded, is the creators of Dungeons and Dragons put forth this attitude. They embedded it into their game. Like I got some direct quotes. The very, very original creator of D&D, his online name or handle was Gygax, I believe, replied to someone on a forum because they were some issue about D&D at the time was being talked about, and women were commenting on the forum. And he said, quote, he would listen to women's opinions when they started buying his game. I am positive most females do not play RPGs, not even tabletop RPGs, just RPGs, because of a difference in brain function. They do not achieve the same sense of satisfaction from playing. So it's like there's this hardwired from the creator itself, gendered stereotype already embedded. Like for some reason, we at a chemical level enjoy D&D less, and it just like saying it out loud just sounds so stupid. And that was the original creator, but then jump ahead to like, okay, that's one guy. Like the game's bigger than the person who made it. Jump ahead a few years to 3rd edition D&D. The creator of 3rd edition also had the same opinions. Direct quote from him. Role-playing as currently construed appeals disproportionately to guys because it's mostly about the things that men evolved to enjoy, hunting and warfare. LARPing is more female appeal because it's more about personalities, relationships, clothing, and makeup. So it just goes back to just all these hardwired binary gender things throughout society. But when the creators of this game, like the people who made the entire system you're playing in, are the ones putting forth that idea, it's not a stretch to wonder where it comes from. Then combine that with internet and like nerd gamer culture in quotes overall, it's just something that, like, don't get me wrong, like leaps have been made, but there's obviously still ways to go because this attitude still exists. They might not put it in as such clearly terribly worded like that it's some sort of biological thing, but clearly a minority still thinks that. And that's the attitudes you have to kind of accept being ready to encounter. And then also as a woman in the TTRPG scene, because the original question was, what does it mean? It also means, I think, especially if you're like myself or Belle, who then do it online, we don't just play at home with friends, we live stream our campaign. You have to kind of take on almost like some aspect of being willing to be role model's the wrong word, but just like an example or like a fountain of knowledge or a paragon of this is how to do it. And if you make a mistake, you're going to be held to a much more critical lens and much more accountable than in my opinion, if a male would make the same mistake. And like there's some examples on that, but Belle, I'm sure you would agree.
Yeah, I totally agree. I also think you kind of have to navigate a field of troll behavior and just general attitudes that have been evolved in misogynistic traditions. And if you are like streaming it online, you're expected to be almost like at a professional level of D&D knowledge. Like you're supposed to know everything. And I have quite a good handle on the rules and stuff now because I've been playing for like 2 years or something. But I don't know the lore because I've never looked into the lore. But so many times people are like, oh, well, you do know this and that. I'm like, no.
Yeah. Well, like classic examples, again, like Belle and I are both fans of Critical Role. Obviously lots of people in the D&D world are, because it's one of the most mainstream or widest audiences of any online Dungeons & Dragons campaign. And look at the example, the amount of hate and rules lawyering and people like trying to dictate how they should have played their characters on Twitter that Laura Bailey or Marisha Ray get compared to any of the male counterparts in that cast. Like just a few months ago, Marisha, people were tweeting at her that she's playing her monk rog, and then she tweeted back, I've only been playing for X amount of years. Here's my character sheet. Here's the exact rule that tells me I had to do that. But sure, go ahead and tell me how to play my character. Like, thanks. I needed that. Highly sarcastic. And even in the first campaign, her character, Keyleth, got so much hate. It became a meme in the cast. They would joke about it when Sam Riegel would make his comedic ads for their sponsors. He'd mention, like, he made one that was like a telephone hotline for D&D. It's like, if you are here to spew hatred about Keyleth's character and say that she is being played terribly, press 9. And like, they all laughed. But it's like, why does it even have to get to that point? Why is that a thing? And then down to a smaller example, in our exact campaign, at the beginning, there was a whole bunch of people DMing various, like I was getting DMs that Belle got tons of accusations that she was cheating.
Yeah.
Just because she rolled really well And like she's a barbarian. Most of the checks she was doing were checks that her character was good at, because the way her character is designed is she's not going to do something if she isn't fairly confident you'd succeed. And like we made an emote about it, became a joke, the cheat with Belle emote. But like did anyone else in the campaign ever get accused of that when they rolled just as well? Like is anyone else concerned that at all the successes? I don't think anyone even counted. No one was keeping track of how often any men in the party did. So
no one has.
Damn. Yeah, that is very true. And like you were saying, like a lot of the D&D community, I'm sure, is following the Critical Role situation. And yeah, on Twitter, I've seen a lot of hate towards Marisha Ray, and it's like, there is an unfortunate side as content creators. We put ourselves out there, and a lot of people would say, well, you should expect to interact with the internet. Well, it's like, that's an excuse. The internet, people behind your computers, you've got to be better. This isn't on like us to just go out there and be like, expect the world is now going to be rough on you. And especially for women, it's like, no, so everybody else, you got to step up and be supportive. Yes, this is entertainment, but also this is passion. This is art. Mm-hmm. We do this because we love it and we want to share it. And if you're knocking anybody down for it, it's not conducive to a kind world.
And even that idea, it's like, well, you're putting it on the internet. If you want to just like not have that, play offline, play at home. We're not complaining per se about people throwing hate or trying to rules lawyer on the internet, even though we should be, because get a better hobby, honestly. But it's the proportionality of it. It's the fact that how come it happens like 3 to 10 times more frequently to women? Like it'd be one thing if the men in the campaign were getting equal amounts of people trying to tell them what to do or how to do it, but they're not. And that's the thing people keep seeming to overlook. It's like we are aware it is bullshit, but that a thing that comes with being anyone on the internet, but in particularly a woman, means you're going to get from the level of like harmless, stupid troll to like actually offensive and like things that stick with you off the screen. But
yeah,
why does it have like? Can it at least be even? Can it at least happen to other people as much as me? Like,
yeah, the clear imbalance in that distribution. I mean, I don't feel like the distribution should be the goal, like to put more hate out there on men specifically. But if we like evened it out and made it less hate for everybody. But I get what you're saying.
How about just a net loss?
Yes.
Net loss.
How about we just stop doing that?
Yes. Just folks, be kind out there. A lot of us aren't making money on these internet projects. We're just doing it because we like to share. So be kind.
We're just out here vibing.
Yeah.
Vibe.
So, and I guess we kind of touched on this already, but how do you both feel that the overall community is doing in terms of being welcoming to others? And what can we do to continue to improve?
I feel like there have been steps of progress recently in that there's been more call out of this behavior, but there's still a long way to go. It still happens frequently, and that's unacceptable even just on its own.
2 examples I could think of also, there was, I think his name was Mike Merles. It was a while ago, but there was, again, a higher up worked for Wizards of the Coast, the makers of D&D, and all the stuff came out, multiple women coming forward with stories of harassment and abuse from this man, to the point that, like the expression, there's too much smoke for there to be no fire. Like clearly there is at least a decent amount of truth to all these stories. And I believe an investigation was done, and he even took time away from the company because clearly they found enough evidence to be like, yeah, he was harassing women. He was never fired. He came back. They had almost like a return party when he came back online, and all the women were like, what message are you sending to your players? That this guy can be a known serial harasser of women, treat them as lesser, like objects to be looked at in their world, as ornaments to their game. But you don't care. And then another example, there was a big campaign. It wasn't D&D. It was a different system. I don't know too much about it. I don't know if it's they made it up or if it's a TTRPG that exists. It's one that's very like futurist, and it might have been in space, but there's like, like cyborgs and things like that. And one of the characters, it was either entirely robot or part human, part robot. And their DM was a man. It was a female player. And there was some scene where basically the DM raped his player in game,
Yeah.
but without.
I remember that.
And because he had this thing where it was described as like, think of Cyberpunk right now, big, like they have that thing you can jack in, you have like that cable, it's connected to you and comes out and you can hook into technology. That character's robot obviously had orifices in her body the way we do, but they were more like it's a USB slot as opposed to like, genitalia or something. And she went to get healed, like that game's version of healing, like for repairs. But instead the doctor, the DM, NPC had some like experimental treatment and was like, oh, just trust me, and described inserting part of his body into one of these hubs and described that she got a weirdly pleasurable, like, I don't remember the details, but basically, and she felt really uncomfortable during, but didn't know why, because he didn't overtly say, this is what's happening, but then the more she thought about it and the more she rewatched the scene, she's like, you just, like, assaulted my character. That is what happened. There was no warning. You didn't ask. We didn't talk about this. Like, what the heck? And so she took time away from the campaign. The internet agreed en masse. There was no question about what this DM did, and it was messed up. And then he still was like, oh, well, I didn't mean it that way, and I'm being treated unfairly. So he took as much, like a little bit of time away just to look like he cared or that he learned anything, and then came back to the scene and is still running games and stuff in the world of online TTRPGs. And everyone's like, what do you mean? What do you mean you don't understand what you did was wrong? And that he played it off as, well, I don't think it was wrong, but I'm sorry your feelings were hurt kind of vibe, rather than I did something wrong.
Those apologies that are never, I'm sorry for my behavior. I'm sorry that you were offended by my behavior.
Yeah. And actually, that gives me an idea, going back to the root of this question, is what can people do to improve? We also had a scenario in our own campaign, mine and Belle's, where something didn't sit well with me, and I didn't talk about it for a long time because I thought it's me being a bit oversensitive or me stretching. But then the more I thought about it, I was like, no, just because the male players in our campaign, through no fault of their own, but not having to live with the types of things that we live with as women in terms of like our risks for our safety and stuff. We had to have a conversation about, you know what, I would like all substances from our game ban. Any substance that when given to someone removes their ability to consent or make like an informed choice, I don't want it in our game. Like, to be used against purely evil, like truly they are NPCs and we know there's no question of their morality and their like that's one thing. But on any player or party member, like love potions, scrapped from our game, unacceptable. And it started as a joke. One of our players in player prank wars, my character had a kid in the campaign, and they joked about using the love potion on my player's kid, or my character's kid, and just to make, and then flirt with her and get her to like one of the party members as a joke. And it made me feel really uncomfortable. And it was because I, as a woman, think about, there was like, I go to public settings, I have to have a hand on my drink at all times. I can't put a drink down. I like things like that. So we as women, that's a risk we're much more inherently aware of. So that would bug me much more than any of the male players in our game, let alone, and I didn't talk about it for a long time because I do have a personal history where something happened to me when I was under the influence of substances that I did not want to take as a teenager. So I didn't talk about it because I thought it was just purely because of my personal ties to it and that I was overreacting. The more I think about it, it's like, it doesn't matter. Even if it was only because of my experience, that's not a unique experience. That's not sadly a rare statistic. The statistic is 1 in 3 women have been assaulted in their lifetime. So that means if you have like 3 women in a room, it's pretty much a guarantee at least one of them has. And so we talked about it. It was like a less than pleasant conversation for our group to have, but only like net positive gains were made from it. And a way I think you can help avoid that in the future is now, obviously have those conversations before, but there's an easy way to have them through. There's something called the TTRPG Safety Toolkit that, but they have these like one letter, and then the group would have seen it. That would have been their cue to like, all right, pivot away from this. We won't progress with this story, and we can talk about offline after session what the issue was so we avoid doing it. So if you're going to have, like, really should do it with any group, not just women. It can only benefit, but particularly if you're having a group that has lots of mixed gender identities overall, I'd say very cool thing to do some research on, the safety toolkit, and to implement into your own campaign, I guess.
For any minority, to be honest, that comes in really, really handy. Like, I have a bunch of disabilities, and it's not part of the conversation we're having today, but there are things in there that you can see would clearly be ableist. And if I had some kind of reaction towards that because of my own experiences in real life, then that's totally valid and should be respected. Just conversations about boundaries.
Yeah, it shouldn't be restricted to like visual demographics. Like there are things under the surface of many people's lives that might upset them in a game. So definitely go over the things that might upset your players before you even begin playing. But I'll track down the links for this safety toolkit, and I'll include that as a resource in the description of this video if you're watching it on YouTube, or in the description of wherever you're watching this or listening to this podcast.
I'll say if you don't have the link, I'm pretty sure I bookmarked it because I thought it was such a cool tool, but I'm pretty sure you probably have it as well.
I'll include it.
Toolkit.
It'll be somewhere in our Discord chat for Dungeon Select, to be honest.
Yeah. Oh boy, but after 2 years of play, do you know how much is in that chat? Do you have any concept how long that chat is?
I have to keep remembering like keywords.
How many messages are even pinned in that chat right now?
Oh god.
Is there a way to check? Can you check how many messages are pinned? You can just see them, but there's no way to a quick number.
Oh no.
I'd love to know a very quick
Oh no.
Anyway, that'd be a fun thing for another time.
Going back to that idea of that love potion that you brought up, anything in a game that removes agency from a player, especially something that they don't want to happen, is so critical. Like in my games, I've homebrewed a rule where it's like, if there is player-on-player interaction where they're trying to influence another player, the player that is attempting to be influenced, I just say, you make no role, you decide how this goes, and you narrate this, because this is something for your character.
Yeah, that's really nice.
So tell me how it goes.
I like that. It's funny because it's also a recurring thing that now keeps kind of coming up, because we just last week had a similar, not to the same level, like much more gray area, but there's currently now some party drama in our campaign going on, because again, it was just an argument of one player was like, we're in a really sketchy place, I don't want to stay here, I want to leave immediately. And one person who wanted to be like, give me an hour, I want to see if I can find something in this place. But that character is very new to the party because they had a character death and had to make a new character. So their character doesn't have the rapport with the rest of the party yet. So they didn't really, I guess their character didn't feel like we'd listen if they were like, hey, give me a favor, give you an hour. Our party be like, no, you're new. Psh, let's go. So they just went off to try and do it, to try and go. So the person who was a bard, the other player, to try and get them to listen, it was, again, just to try and get them to, no, like, hold on, you don't understand. I don't just want to leave because I'm being annoying. Like, I have serious reservations about staying here. Tried to use the spell Enthrall, which, again, they're like, that's fine, because Enthrall is unlike, like Charm Person or using, like, a love potion. It doesn't actually affect your ability to make a decision or your thoughts toward a person. All it does is make you have to listen to them. So he would have just thought in that, for that next, whatever his next sentences were, whatever he was saying was very important and he should listen to it. But then the character be free to make their own decision on what they heard. So they're like, that's fine. I'm not making you do anything you wouldn't normally do. And it escalated. Some petty party shenanigans happened. And then later, so we now have like our party dad basically going around having one-on-one chats, everyone going, do you remember what we talked about? Do you remember we had that whole love?
And the bard who was trying to cast Enthrall actually got fed into the conversation as well.
Because I'm gonna have a chat with them. But yeah, it's also, I say the other thing in terms of how you can help. This seems really silly, or they've interpreted something completely wrong. Let them say what they need to say, and then just always be willing to talk about the stuff and hash things out and go into it without any judgments or preconceived notions. Because even if you never in a million years might have seen something the way another player in your group did, give them time to explain it, and then maybe you will. You'll be like, oh, I can't believe I didn't think about that. That's crazy. And then even if you don't, be like, well, okay, but I'm glad you told me because it makes you uncomfortable. We want everyone at the table to have nothing but fun playing this game, so we won't do it again.
Even you as a player, if you're uncomfortable with something, don't suppress it and convince yourself it's nothing. If it makes you uncomfortable, then it's something and you should say it, and then you'll have way much more fun.
And if somebody approaches the group with something that is concerning them, and maybe it was something that you have done, like don't go on the defensive. Like that's not the point. Like let them talk, because something that might have seemed trivial to you might be a big deal to them. So let them explain themselves, because we've all got our different perspectives. And
yeah,
Don't try to explain why you've done what you've done. Just let them have their word and let them tell you why what you did bothered them. Because that's what's important.
Because even afterwards, if you go, I didn't even realize, here's the only reason I did it. And you might both, and even the person who originally was really upset might be like, I also never thought that would be the reason. I totally get it. And by the end, you'll probably both laugh about it and you'll like move on. Because also a lot of times, especially in a situation like ours, and particularly for a lot of people right now during pandemic times, because I feel like a lot more Dungeons and Dragons games are virtual now and not like sat in person rolling a dice at the same table. So also communication things are more likely to get misconstrued if you're doing it all over Discord or Zoom, especially if you don't have like video on, you don't have body language cues to read into it. So again, even if you think you did nothing wrong, like you said, let the person tell you, because you might realize, oh, I didn't even realize that's how it would come across, my bad. And if you did, and when the person's telling that to you, they're not telling it to you 9 times out of 10 to attack you. They're not telling it to you to make you feel guilty. They're not trying to be like, you did this and now you're a shit person because you did this. They're just trying to tell you so it doesn't happen again, and that you can do the things that grown-ups do and go, I'm sorry that upset you, figure out, talk about it, move on. And they're not telling it to you because they want to stir the pot and start a fight. They want to keep going with the game, particularly if you've all been enjoying the campaign up until that point. It's like, why would this person that is coming to you, it's like, why, or especially if it's a woman, why do you think they would want to disrupt that? It's probably a good reason if they have something to bring up, because otherwise they're ruining something that's a good thing for them too, right? That they enjoy. So be counterintuitive.
Something that I think might be a little bit off of the trail here, but I really want to get your guys' opinion on this. I mentioned that we've all mentioned that we've watched Critical Role to some extent. And one of the players in that campaign is a man playing a woman. Now, I'm curious as to your perspective on something like that. What does that mean for the group? What does that mean for in your eyes? I'm interested in this conversation because I'm like, I feel like he's doing a good job with it, but I want to know what your perspective on it is.
I'm not up to date with Critical Role at the minute, but from what I've seen of the campaign, like, I think it's great. We have one of our characters, one of our players is a guy playing a woman.
Yeah, we have the same situation right now. Perfect.
Yeah.
His third character, he had 2 guys die, and he's like, let's try women and see if it sticks. I don't know.
So far it has. Maybe there's a lesson there.
So far.
Oh, man. But I think he's doing a great job as well.
Yeah.
I don't really have an issue with it. I don't think it's like a bad thing. Yeah. I think I welcome it.
Yeah, I have no issue with it, because also that goes down to, like, especially online, like say someone came into our campaign, for example, let alone Critical Role, they saw the player's name is Sokoler and his character he's playing is a character named Morwin, and say they just came in, looked in, and saw Soko putting on a high-pitched voice and immediately decided to get offended because he's stereotyping like women. But then if you stand around and watch, he's never done anything in that character that to me feels like a 2-dimensional stereotype or at women's expense. Like, that's the only things to avoid. I think anyone should be able to play any character they want, regardless of gender identity, especially like look at the age we're in. Because it's like, if you look at someone and say you shouldn't be playing that, well, you're assuming their own gender already right away as the player. But number 2, where it becomes an issue is if you're going to boil it down to tropes. Like, if because Soko started playing a woman, he went around and started trying to, like, say, sleep with all the NPCs, or if he started, like, maybe it's like, oh, started playing more dumb because he's a woman, that even with a high intelligence stat was playing like stupid encounters because, ooh, women, things like that. So I think play any gender you want, just make sure you're playing it in a way that doesn't rely on or use anything that's normally common ground to be used against that minority or that gender identity, anything that's derogatory anyway. If it's part of your character, so like if you're playing a low strength character as a woman, like I'm playing a female right now who has a negative strength modifier, like that's fine. But it's because she's a 2'6" the halfling, and when she needs to do something, whether she shapeshifts into a giant animal because she's a druid, it's not because she's a woman, you know? Just make sure whatever choices you're making are for a stronger reason than like gender tropes, I guess, and then you'll be safe. And like, again, Critical Role, Sam playing Not/Veth, I'm not up to date either. I'm on episode 68 of campaign 2, and I've watched all of campaign 1. I have not seen Sam Riegel do anything in the moment that I'm like, that's super sexist, or you're only doing that because you're playing a female character. Like, I think there are things he'd do in other characters he's played. Like, if anything, his character in campaign 1, Scanlan, was had almost a lot more feminine tropes to it. Like, the thing that bugs me in D&D, like, I want to get away from this whole bards need to fuck everything.
Oh, yeah,
Can we get past that? Because, like, our bard in our campaign has never once, correct me if I'm wrong, Belle, never once tried to seduce anyone. I don't think Ged's ever tried to seduce anyone. Or if so, it was, like, necessary plot thing in the moment. Yeah, it wasn't, like...
Maybe one time.
But yet not a lot. Like, we have to think hard to think about what has happened. It's not the cliche of bard, see humanoid, mildly attractive, passively attractive, bang them. Like, that's not a thing.
Or dragon.
Sleep with dragon because I can, like, no. But yeah, that's complete tangent. But if I had one D&D wish list that wasn't like, hey, have women be treated the same as men in the scene, it would be, can we forget this whole bards sleep with everyone stereotype? Because I think it's not really that funny anymore. It's just so cliche. Over it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Other characters sleep with anyone. Funny. Bard, not funny anymore.
Yeah, that's why we've moved into the Horny Paladin memes now.
Yes.
Have you guys heard of this? Where they're just like, you're a paladin of a fertility god. Perfect reason.
Fuck everything.
Love it.
Yeah, you can really make anything.
Just playing that paladin like, ooh, that's a sexy treat.
I mean, to be fair, Trim might call a tree sexy if it was a really fancy looking tree.
Oh,
yeah,
grief.
I can see that happening.
Are there any other notes that either of you want to add on any of these topics we've hit on?
I think the other thing that'd be really cool, and it's very hard to do, I think, because I talked about how could we maybe progress things in the scene. So I can't think of any online D&D campaign that I've seen or TTRPG related content or things. Like, if you're looking for women in the scene, you have to like seek them out. They're usually, again, one or two scattered amongst the campaign of like male identifying people, or maybe you get like 2, maybe even 3. But I think it'd be really cool if we could have some more women taking initiative to run their own, maybe an entirely female campaign, or not just campaigns, but even like maybe YouTube channels where you're talking about deep dives into the lore of some of these systems or things like that. And obviously it's easier said than done because most of us don't have the time or the confidence to do something like that. But I guess like that's one way. Like, I've even toyed with the idea of DMing for so long, but part of it is I've had such good DMs my whole life, and then watching Critical Role, I just now have an impossibly high standard that I don't feel like I could ever meet, and I'm too intimidated to ever try DMing. Plus, I don't have time to do all the world building, so it definitely have to be a pre-made, like buy something from Wizards of the Coast or some other system to run, or like Vampire. I want to do a Vampire the Masquerade game so bad.
I'm down.
Because of my vampire obsession at some point. But that's a whole new system to learn. And I'm like, oh boy. But speaking of that, there's another thing too. I think D&D's also come under fire lately because there was all that stuff about the embedded racial stereotypes, the negative ones with some of the races in D&D. And I think that has a lot of crossover with the like treatment women receive as well. Because even going back to those quotes I said earlier in the podcast episode with even the creators being like, well, D&D appeals to men because like hunching, warrior, manly, and women like LARPing because makeup and costumes. That attitude, because also a lot of the stuff in it, like for example, a lot of the elven related tropes and like drow elves, obviously there's lots of like anti-black tones in there. Not great. Even the orc race, there was lots of debate on who is this supposed to portray. We all know that they had someone in mind, and like, what message does that say? And D&D's answer, they even like, well, we're going to work on it. We'll even put a whole chapter in our next book, Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, addressing it. And their addressing it was, oh, if you don't like it, just don't play with racial stat bonuses. They did nothing to actually remove it from their system. They did nothing to change up these tones in their thing. Whereas Vampire the Masquerade doesn't have races because they're all vampires. They have clans. And there are clans in that game that were fairly racist. Like there was a nomadic clan, I can't remember their name, that was, everyone always thinks they are criminals. People have this high perception of them stealing. They're untrustworthy, and a high emphasis on their nomad heritage. They were basically a parody of like Roma, Gypsy, traveling peoples from Europe, and racist. There's one vampire clan that was based off of people from tribes from northern Africa, and the way they were perceived, and the way I can't remember the details, but the way they were written about was also very clearly like, we're taking influence from this one very racist trope from history in the real world. There's also one vampire clan that literally, the more evil they get, the darker their skin gets. We can't make it much more obvious than that, like with the anti-blackness there. So, but what they did was they reworked the clans, took that out. A clan related to trickster gods, like Loki. Every culture around the world has a trickster god. The thievery and the mistrust in your, like, Merle's being accused of harassment still gets to work there. And just clearly this lack of desire to be accountable and to change things that are problematic because it would require work. And they're like, we're still making money, and a lot of our player base will buy anyway. That just, again, sends a message that if you are not in the majority, you are a minority that plays our game. We don't really care as much about your experience. So I think that's also something that maybe if you're a woman in the space, maybe the problem, as much as I love it and it's the system I know and play in every week, the problem could be D&D. Try looking into other RPGs, because also there's so many wonderful RPG systems out there that don't get the attention they do because they don't have something as big as Critical Role. They're not as accessible. They haven't been around as long as Dungeons and Dragons. But yeah, look into some other, like maybe do a Cthulhu game, do a Vampire the Masquerade game. There's so many RPG systems that maybe would be a bit more welcoming, and also less people play them, so you're more likely you could get a whole group together of newbies and not be like that one newbie in a group of experienced players, and add that layer of, oh, I'm nervous into it, because you're all learning and you're all figuring it out.
I think as well, like, you can kind of see how just unwilling not just the D&D game itself, but like that
internet culture,
one section of D&D community, in things like the combat wheelchair that got introduced.
Oh my god, yes.
And people went absolutely berserk. It was ridiculous, really, just how furious.
It's like, oh, I'm so sorry, in your game of fantasy and magic that, God forbid, you all of a sudden want this one thing to be confined to the laws of physics and the real world, but the rest of your game like has no bearing of that. Like, I
want dragons, but I want no wheelchairs because it's stupid. Like, why would you have a wheelchair in a fantasy? What? It doesn't make any sense, and I hate it.
You know what? Let's meet those haters and do them one better. We're gonna put a dragon in a wheelchair.
Hey!
Oh, hell yeah! Dragons in wheelchairs.
Like, no, you know how there's like when there's dogs or pets that they had to have like their back legs don't work for amputees, and they make those little, like, they substitute their back legs for like wheels, and it's like a little thing they sit in. I want a dragon that has that for his back legs that doesn't have it, or a dragon like Toothless from How to Train Your Dragon that has an artificial wing or a tail or some shit.
Yeah,
that's what I want.
Dragons with prosthetics.
Prosthetic dragons.
There's so much we got to do to make this community more inclusive. And I agree. There is plenty of reason to read other rule sets as well, beyond just looking for something else. The more rules you read, you can possibly get idea for homebrewing your own system entirely.
Yeah.
And even if you're looking for something like, clearly D&D has its own systemic things that it's got to work out, because it's definitely not moving as fast as I would like it to. There are home rules that make the game better. But even just looking at like Pathfinder, which is a very flavorful same system, but I think their core is a bit better and lacking that systemic fault that D&D is. So Pathfinder might be the easiest transition to a different rule set.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've never played Pathfinder, but I've always been intrigued.
Me neither.
Like, so right now, if I had to choose, I have such a limited time, I could probably only fit one more. It would definitely be learn Vampire the Masquerade, because I was always into the idea before, just because I'm a slut for vampires. But then, in particular, when I read that article about like, oh look, it was pointed out that they had racist shit in their game and they changed it and didn't argue about it, and I was like, yes, this is what I want.
Yeah, I should look into that system too. That sounds quite intriguing. But otherwise, how's about we play a little game?
Yeah, I love games.
So I didn't have much time to prep today's game. So the game that we've landed on is one where we are going to collaborate and we are going to quickly build a character. And that's why this game is called Building Character. The rules for this game. We're each going to take turns contributing to this character that we're going to build together. Things such as a name, a character class, their high and low stats, whatever you can think of that you want to add to this, feel free to. We'll each take turns adding something, and eventually we'll consider the character done. You can even add something like a character voice. So, who would like to start us off?
I'll start because someone was talking about, we'll start with this race the other day, and we had in an off-stream campaign I played in that we had a character come in, or a player come in and make a character of this race, and then the campaign ended the next week, so I never got to play it. I think it's pronounced LauraK483. It's like the humanoid bird race.
Oh yeah,
like they're bipedal, and they have like hands and everything's using, but they're like feathered and beak, and like the bird people in the Breath of the Wild, Legend of Zelda.
Ooh.
Yeah, like one of those, but make them clumsy, so low dexterity.
Ooh.
Yes.
A clumsy bird.
Like they were the bird, they got pushed out of the nest and they just fell.
Yeah.
And they didn't fly the first time.
Okay. So they're an LauraK483. Their dexterity is their low stat.
Dex.
Yep.
Let's say that they are.
Let's make their high stat be either intellect or wisdom, because like our player, he had to speak. They're kind of like many birds. They couldn't speak common, but they could like mimic, like almost like parrots or ravens. But maybe this one's like because they physically were so shit to compensate, they've learned to actually speak common, even though they're a bird person. So I feel like you need a pretty high intelligence or wisdom to do that.
I agree. And I'm going to add a little physical description to them. They are very macaw-like, that very colorful parrot.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
All right, what else do we got?
Terms of class. Probably was like, it seems like you want to go cliche and make them something book smart because it's that like wizard or something, but since this is for lulz and not for practicality, I'm like, but what could we do that's more fun?
An artificer.
Yes, that.
And they're clumsy, so their inventions tend to go a little bit haywire.
Because maybe their first invention, we talked about the prosthetic wings before, maybe their first invention, because of also their how much they sucked at flying and they couldn't learn how to fly. Maybe they ended up making like prosthetic wings and things to help other injured animals or animal humanoids. Like the puppies with the wheels for legs.
Oh.
Ah, my heart.
And their voice, I want them to sound like Ian McKellen. They sound like Sir Ian McKellen. I want it to sound like Gandalf.
Oh, that right, Ian McKellen. I was thinking of Sean Connery for some reason.
No. That'd be good though. That would also work.
Oh dear, how does Sir Ian McKellen? Bilbo Baggins, I'm here to build you a leg to replace the one you're missing.
I've also just found one of my new favorite TikToks. There's this guy who just dresses as like budget Gandalf and does a funny impression, and his TikTok is my new favorite thing. His latest one was someone in nothing but flesh color underpants runs in pretending to be Smeagol at his door, and he has a note, and it's from Frodo, and it's like, Gandalf, watch over Smeagol for me. And then he's like, you shit. And then it's like just a montage while You've Got a Friend in Me plays. It's just Gandalf like fighting with Smeagol in his house, but in a modern day. Like it's at one point it starts and he's sitting by a swimming pool and he's like, swimming pool is nice and cool. And then pans to Gandalf with, what the shit is he doing? And then he's like, has a foam sword that's just hitting something on his couch. And he's like, I'm going to kill Frodo. And then he goes like, he whistles and it's like Shadowfax, and a white van pulls up because modern. And they get the van and they go to like McDonald's and he's in the back and Smeagol starts throwing chicken nuggets. He's like, not inside Shadowfax. It goes to like hit him. I'm fucking dying.
Oh
so
my
good.
goodness.
It was so
Don't tempt me, Frodo.
So I think we've got a flaw for this character as well, that being their inventions aren't great.
Yeah.
Oh, it's like they always work, but they work in a way that isn't intended. It's like, oh, this was supposed to help you fly, but instead of fly, it's like, oh, but it actually makes this really cool sound. You invented like a weird woodwind instrument, and actually now you're a really sick bard with these like fake wings I built for you based on how the air moves across them when you attempt to flap your wings. Like something weird. Like every invention he makes works, but for a completely different purpose.
It doesn't work, but it also has a use.
Yeah.
Let's give him a bond. Does this character have a favorite invention?
Something pretty unique. I've never played an artificer before. I don't even know much about the class. All I know comes from watching Sam Riegel play it in campaign 1 for a brief time.
Yeah, and that wasn't even like the final fleshed out version.
No.
Let's say it's a piece of jewelry, because to generalize birds like shiny things, right?
Yes.
Oh dear. And it's a pendant that there's a button on the back of it, and when the button is pressed, it like expands out into like a mega horn.
Yes. What was it supposed to be when he made it? Because that's the fun part. So instead of maybe it was supposed to be a necklace that when you like hit it, the button, it would become like a helmet, like Iron Man almost. It was an a suit, but instead it just became this awkward, like the first draft was like almost like this conical shape, and then realized, well, could use it like a megaphone, and rather than becoming the full helmet.
It just didn't fold out correctly.
Yeah, it like became a town caller, but
Town
instead
crier,
of a bell, yeah, a town crier. Instead of a bell, he just has this weirdly shaped horn.
What else can we add to them?
So maybe background, like, there's like charlatan, hermit, like local hero. What's his background? Something in the town crier vibe. Can we make? Is there a background that would fit well with? I don't know all the backgrounds off the top of my head. To the player's handbook.
You're not a real D&D player. You don't know all the backgrounds.
I don't know everything. Oh
dear.
God, I shouldn't be allowed to play. What am I doing? Oh my God.
Stupid woman brain.
Oh my God.
Here we go. Okay. Maybe in a backwards way, but entertainer is kind of interesting because like his inventions, rather than them working there, it's like it was entertaining to the town he lived in. Of how's it gonna fuck up today? And watching him try and pretend that's what I meant the whole time. I don't know what you're talking.
Yeah.
Or like guild artisan. But the difference is he's been in every guild because he joins one thinking I'll make these inventions, and then he tries to make it for that purpose. It doesn't work. So then he joins the guild that invention's relevant for, but then actually tries to make that invention. It doesn't work. So he keeps he guild hops because he can't actually make consistently the same devices for one guild.
And another flaw for them, because that background, the character has to pay like a certain amount of money for their membership fees. Their membership fees are more expensive because they're part of more guilds.
Yes. And probably overdue at a few guilds because, failed inventor doesn't make a lot of money.
Oh my goodness.
As Disney teaches us.
And this character's going to need a name.
Oh, I'm so bad. I'm terrible. I literally go to fantasy name generators because I'm god awful. My other strat was I take my favorite fictional language that's ever invented and I look up words in it and try and pick words that are relevant to my character and turn it into a name.
I just think hearing Ian McKellen just say Jeffrey as seriously as possible makes me laugh. Jeffrey.
I'm Jeffrey.
I like it.
Jeffrey, I'm going to throw a last name on them. They are Jeffrey
Featherbrain, because they make fun of him because he's a bird person, but then that's an expression for a general person who's absent-minded or can't do anything right, and because he can't do any of his inventions right.
And you know what? I feel like that's a nickname the town gave him, and he's so featherbrained that he kind of embraced it.
He thought it was a compliment, and he's like, yeah.
Yeah.
That is the title I've been given.
I love Jeffrey.
Jeffrey Featherbrain, there we go.
One of us has to play this character if in campaign 2 our first characters die.
Oh, no.
And I think we can consider that a character built.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a lot of fun. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
With that being said, that does bring us on to the final segment of this podcast. This is our chance to hear from the listeners. This is Question Dicely. The question that I've got today comes from Sheldon Caldwell and the Cadets, and you can find him as @shellfish16 on Instagram. His question is, what is your favorite D&D moment?
I say it every time because we've been asked this. We had a big 1-year retrospective on our campaign because we're now at 2 years almost, or all.
Yeah,
we're almost there. We haven't hit it yet, right? For Dungeon Select. Yeah,
I don't think so.
We're coming up on 2 years, but we had a special talk show podcasty thing for our 1 year and asked what our favorite was, and I think nothing's happened in year 2 that tops it. It's the honorable mention for me, second place, because I've played 2 characters in this campaign. The first one is not because a character died, but we actually wrapped up the character's kind of personal story so well it didn't make sense for her to keep adventuring. And she was a water genasi, so she could control water. and we were fighting a vampire character who was a key part of Belle's character's backstory. And I didn't think it would work, but there's the whole thing of vampires can't cross running water. So as a joke, before the fight, I took a ring of water and animated it so it was continuously circling their coffin. And vampires in D&D, you kill them, they become mist, and they regenerate unless you can kill them in that mist form. And because of the ring of water, he couldn't get back into his coffin. Like, our DM told us later, you were not supposed to kill him. He was supposed to survive, and I was going to bring him back. But the running water thing fucked it up, and we actually managed to then kill him. So, honorable mention for a dumb use of control water coming in MVP.
I think my favorite D&D moment actually happened quite recently, and sounds extremely like it should not be a good D&D moment.
Uh-oh.
You're just a dark and twisted person. We understand.
Yeah. To cut a long story short, my character picked up a cursed object, or it was kind of cursed. That meant that Orcus now lived in her head.
The wand, yeah. The wand of Orcus.
And we had like a summer time skip, and that whole time she had Orcus kind of in her head, but couldn't say anything.
Because if she tried to tell us, it would like hurt her. So she couldn't actually make it clear to anyone in the group.
And if I tried to tell anyone, I had to roll wisdom, and my wisdom is not high.
You're a barbarian, enough said.
Yeah. And they were in an airship and got attacked. And the bard casted, what was it? I can't remember.
No, I had Beacon of Hope up because I have the charm
you had
that
Beacon
lets
of Hope
me
up.
do it. Yeah.
Yeah, and in that moment with her wisdom higher, she managed to just go like, Orcus is living in my head, and then just vanishes.
Because then Orcus got mad and took her away.
Yeah. And he cut off her prosthetic arm.
But to be fair, she'd already removed one. Like, she had the prosthetic arm of her own choice.
Yeah, I cut off my own arm.
And then he took it. That was a big debated moment. There was lots of party strife with that decision when it happened.
And it did happen. She did just find it in the shop and decide to cut her arm off so she could use it immediately. But
reminder, wisdom stat not so high.
It's now gone. That arm is now in the abyss, and she got tortured.
You have an upgraded arm now, though.
Yeah, now my arm is better because it has guns in it. But yeah, I think that was my favorite moment.
Your face.
For myself, I think one of my favorite D&D moments was not one I played, but one I DM'd. I set up a campaign where one of the characters was a human fighter, and the theme of the campaign was secrets. I was like, all right, what is your secret? And he's like, there was this event that had happened, and I don't know much about it. I'm like, okay, great. So this isn't a secret that you have, but rather a discovery for yourself. Mm-hmm. And so I gave him a secret. His secret was this event did some soul swapping, and he was fighting a shape changer at the time, swapped bodies with the shape changer, automatically turned into the body he recognized, and he's been a shape changer this entire campaign. He's a changeling. And then they were going through this ruin where the event in his past had happened, and there was a sequence that was like the room fills with smoke and with cloud, and a humanoid of cloud materializes and is like, all right, I'm going to share you some memories that happened in this place. And the party kind of got split up. There was the guy that this event had happened to and one other character that was new to the party, and everybody else went a different way. And they were told that...
Oh, that only means good things.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And so they were like, why did it get split up like this? So the character who was a shape changer found his body dead on the floor. And so he was like, what happened? Who am I? And then the other character that was with him, everyone was like, why did you get to see that too? By the end of the campaign, the shape changer passed away in his epilogue. He was quite an old man. But the guy that was with him when he saw his memories later went and did like a family history search and discovered that the old man was his uncle and he never knew. Aww. And so I think that was one of my favorite things, was just these moments of discovery that the players didn't know they wanted.
Oh, that reminds me of two really quick stories. They're too good. I have to tell them. One of them's honorable mention. My favorite D&D moment from like just a silly comedic standpoint that was in an off-stream campaign. It was that campaign I mentioned was mostly women, and I'd never played before. So I didn't understand the intricacies of character creation, and I didn't understand how the stats like translated to gameplay yet. So for fun, I was like, I found this online quiz that you answered 100 questions about yourself, and it gave if LauraK483 was a D&D character, what your stats would be. And my constitution modifier was like hella negative because I have lots of chronic illnesses. So I didn't realize that's very bad. And I was like, I want to use my stats because I basically was just role-playing myself in my first D&D campaign because I was just learning the rules and having a good time. And my DM was like, are you sure? And but like was trying to be like, oh, don't do it. And I was like, yeah, I want to do it. And he was like, okay. And I was playing a sorcerer, which only has a D6 like hit dice. So I basically got like a hit point every time I leveled. So I was a dragonborn sorcerer who I was like the intimidation for the party because I looked big and scary until you touch me. And I'd be like, ow, and like walk away. And then early on in the campaign, I almost died because a child bit me. And that is a real fact. I went down to 2 hit points because a child bit me and I was squishy enough that that's what happened. And oh man, so also I felt so bad for our friend Helen, who was the lawful good paladin, because she spent most of her time laying on hands to my character because I was always dying. And then the other story that yours reminded me of, talking about like secrets and reveals, again, a story from TikTok. If you like D&D and you aren't on TikTok and you're down to get that app, you don't have to make them, but oh my god, there is such D&D TikTok is a wonderful place, friends. And there was a story, someone started a chain saying, tell me what's something you're dying to tell your players or your party, but you can't. Like, you can't tell them. And so this one DM replied, it was like, if you're my player, don't watch this video. And her players had been in a prison. They got caught. They were in a prison. And there were some interesting characters, the cells around them. One cell next to them, I can't remember the race of the person, but it had like a character that they were kind of talking to. And that character had been there for 20 years, and I'd given up hope of ever escaping at this point. It was like, I'm going to die in this cell. And the party decided to use Thunderstep to get 2 of them out of the cell, knowing the cells were too close. They were going to hurt. It was either hurt our party or hurt someone in a cell next to us when casting this. And they just hoped, oh, well, he'll roll well in his save, or maybe he has enough hit points. I'm like, he's been in here for 20 years, dude. How do you think it's going to end? So they cast Thunderstep. They killed the person in the cell next to them. Little do they know, the DM had planned if they could get him freed. That person, one of the players, has a father who has been missing for 20 years and no one knows where he went.
No.
And it was the player's dad that they killed. She's like, I'm waiting. They may never find out. But if they do, so not only, because now that player's already dealing with a lot of in-character guilt of like, we have to use these powers wisely. And like, I killed an innocent. And like, what does that mean for me? And they're already struggling with that. Now we throw in that layer if they're ever to learn it. Cool.
You're my dad. Boogie, boogie, boogie.
Oh, wow. That's deep. Oh,
You want inspiration, D&D TikTok is your friend.
sounds like I got to get myself that TikTok finally.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you both for joining me on the podcast today. This has been a lot of fun and very eye-opening for me, at least. Thank you for sharing your stories. And for the listeners out there, if you want to submit a question to Question Dicely, please send an email with your question to dicelychannel@gmail.com. And don't forget to leave a social media handle for me to give you a shout out.
Yeah.
And for my guests, do you have social media and projects that you'd like to plug?
Oh boy, do we.
Ooh. Personally, my Twitch is twitch.tv/BelleMist, and I stream sometimes. Not very routinely, but sometimes. And play fun things like Spore, because why not?
Sport.
Nice.
I'm really easy. I'm LauraK483, literally everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, Twitch, TikTok, YouTube, literally everywhere. And if you want to watch the campaign we both play in, that is not streamed to our personal channels. It is streamed on our Dungeon Masters channel, which is twitch.tv/thatdutchgeek, all one word. Like I said, we are wrapping up. We're coming up to 2 years, but we're in the end game of our campaign. Like, we're probably somewhere between 5 to 10 sessions left would be my guess personally. And then we're going to start campaign 2. We have a whole new channel just for that, because you mentioned our campaign's called Dungeon Select because it stemmed as a community project from a community we are both in called Level Select, which is an open community on Twitch and Discord for anyone. Highly recommend joining it. We have a website, levelselect.live. Check it out. And so the name was a play on Dungeons and Dragons and Level Select, Dungeon Select. And originally it was streamed on my channel. Then we swapped to our DM's channel because he wanted to use the D&D Beyond extension and have the VODs to upload, which our VODs are uploaded to a YouTube. So if anything of our stories during our campaign sounded intriguing and you want to watch them, look up Dungeon Select on YouTube. And so we're going to finish up campaign 1 on his channel, which is probably going to be like into February and March. I think by the end of March we'll probably be done, but we'll see.
I agree.
And then we're going to take a break while our DM preps campaign 2. And in that break, a lot of our players are going to try and DM some one-shots. We're going to do some like fun stuff. Should be intriguing. And then we're going to come back for campaign 2 on the Twitch channel just for that campaign called twitch.tv/Dungeon Select.
Nice. Yeah, I highly recommend them. It was a lot of fun to watch them play. I think I got through your first arc, and then I've been too busy, but I need to get caught back up. And all the links they've mentioned are going to be listed in the description of wherever you're listening to this podcast.
Have fun with that link dump I'm going to send you later. Oh boy.
Ooh.
It's totally fine. That's what this is for. Also, if you're watching this on YouTube, their Dungeon Select channel is going to be listed amongst the Dice Friends at the bottom of the channel page. Thank you both again for joining me in this conversation today. This was a great time.
Thanks for having us and allowing us to have the conversation.
Yeah.
So more people can listen.
So much fun.
Of course. And for the listeners out there, thank you for tuning in to Speak Dicely. My name is Teni Brant, and I will speak Dicely with you again soon. Bye-bye. The Speak Dicely podcast is produced by Teni Brant. The intro and outro music were created by Salik Brant. If you enjoyed this content, be sure to subscribe to the Dicely D&D YouTube channel. There you can listen to previous episodes of the Speak Dicely podcast, as well as watch our introductory series on how to play Dungeons & Dragons. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitch at DicelyDND. And you can now listen to the podcast on Podbean, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. We'll see you next time on the Speak Dicely podcast.